Hey YouTube, Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Vampire Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for April 2023. I always love updating the Vampire deck. They're probably one of my favorite zombie monster decks that we have in Yu-Gi-Oh! They were just a deck that was very popular when I started playing Duel Links, and they really kind of fell off the circuit for a good while, but I always like updating them. We may be, time for some new Vampire support in the actual TCG. I think Battle of Chaos was the last time we got any Vampire support, but we've had a good amount of it with 2 Link monsters, a new Xyz monster, and some new main deck monsters since that time. Who knows what we can get to add to the support for the Vampire deck, maybe a remade version of Vampire Kingdom. But until then, let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters. For our lower level Vampire monsters, I run 3 copies of Vampire Familiar. If it's special summon, you can pay 500 life points to add 1 Vampire monster from your deck to your hand, except for Vampire Familiar. And if this card is in your graveyard, you can send 1 Vampire card from your hand or face it on the field to the graveyard to special summon it, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of Familiar once per turn. So with this card, you have more of a setup monster to be able to then tribute summon out some of your bigger vampire boss monsters onto the field. Familiar also being able to give you that search for that monster just makes it a very ideal monster to be able to special summon out on the field, whether you use its own monster effect or special summon off of other cards like 1-for-1 onto the field for you to then just pay 500 life points to get that search to your hand. I also run 3 copies of Vampire Retainer. I also like 3 copies of these cards just for the fact that they are banished for a good amount of the time when you use them for their own special summon plays by sending a vampire card from your hand or field from your graveyard back onto the field to special summon it. And with Vampire Retainer having the same special summon setup as Familiar, but with this one being able to pay 500 life points to add 1 Vampire Spell Trap from your deck to your hand, giving you access to a good amount of the setup. One of my favorites being Vampire's Domain, because it just gives you the additional normal summon of a vampire monster onto the field, with the last of our 3 ofs for the vampire cards being 3 copies of Vampire Ghost. If it's normal summon, you can send 1 other vampire card from your hand or face on the field of the graveyard to add 1 level 4 or higher vampire monster from your deck to your hand. And if you do, send 1 level 2 or lower vampire monster from your deck to the graveyard. And during your main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard and pay 500 life points immediately after this effect resolves. Normal summon 1 vampire monster. You can only use this effect of Ghost once per turn. But that all in all is your setup. Being able to send the level 2 or lower monster means you can send either Familiar or Retainer to the graveyard, have that search for that level 4 or higher vampire monster, and then also being able to send Ghost to the graveyard to summon back 1 of those monsters on the field, and also being able to banish it from the graveyard to have that additional normal summon. Ghost can just set up all of your plays that much easy, as long as you have the setup for another vampire card from your hand to send to the graveyard or face up on the field. And then for the bigger boss monster vampire monsters, I run 1 copy of Vampire Volvode. When it's normal summon, being able to target 2 monsters in your opponent's graveyard, special summon them to your field in defense position, but their effects are negated. And when a monster effect is activated while a monster with the same name is in the graveyard, quick effect, you can negate the activation. And if a monster is special summoned to your opponent's graveyard or from your opponent's graveyard, you can tribute 2 monsters to special summon this card from your graveyard, setting up Vampire Volvode onto the field for you to then utilize your opponent's monsters as well to go into the rank 8 zombie vampire, since you can use any of your opponent's monsters that you control as level 8 monsters to summon out onto the field. I also run the 1 copy of Vampire Vamp as another way to take resources and equip them onto this card of your opponents. 1 Shadow Vampire for more of the level 5 plays, being able to special summon a dark vampire monster from your hand or deck, except for your Shadow Vampire. 1 Vampire Scarlet Scourge. When it's normal or special summon, being able to pay 1,000 life points, target a vampire monster in your graveyard except for Scarlet Scourge, and special summon it. The level adjustment also comes down to some of the other cards we may play, and also being able just to revive cards like Vampire Grace onto the field for these 1-of copies for these vampire monsters. The other higher level vampire monster that I run 2 copies of is Vampire Fraulein. When a monster declares an attack, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position. You can only use this effect of Fraulein once per turn and once per battle. If your zombie monster battles an opponent's monster, during damage calc, you can pay life points equal to multiples of 100, max 3,000. Your battling monster gains that much attack and defense during damage calc only. At the end of the battle phase of this card destroyed an opponent's monster by battle, you can special summon them from the graveyard to your field, giving you more of those resources, but Fraulein also acts sort of like an honest card in the deck for you to have some protection for your vampire monsters as well for the field to have. For some of the generic zombie support I run in the deck as well, I run 2 copies of Yugioh Duel Links. You can discard 1 zombie monster to special summon this card from your hand. During your opponent's main phase, quick effect, you can target 1 zombie monster from either graveyard, special summon that monster, or banish it when it leaves the field, then banish this face-up card until the end phase. You can only use each effect of Yugioh Duel Links once per turn. It's an easy special summon resource to then help us go into some of our link monsters from the extra deck, like Vampire Sucker or our Vampire Fascinator, depending on which one you want to summon out, while also setting up some of the other zombie monsters in our graveyard for us to summon back. It doesn't have Vampire in the name, but still a great setup card just to get another resource onto the field. With the last of our main deck monsters being 3 copies of Unizombie, a tuner monster, which does give us access to some synchro plays in the extra deck as well, but it's more graveyard setup as well, and just level adjustment and discard power to increase the target's level by 1 by targeting a face-up monster on the field, and then also being able to send a zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard. Setup and more setup thanks to Unizombie on the field, and like I said, it's a tuner, so we can also go into some synchro plays with the extra deck. That is it for the main deck monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. I run 3 copies of Vampire Desire. I'm always going back and forth between Vampire's Desire and Vampire's Domain for the 3 of that I run in the deck. You can mix and match which one you feel to be a little better for the 3 of spot. Vampire's Desire can also be searched off of Vampire's Retainer, and with it activating one of the effects, targeting 1 face-up monster you control, send 1 vampire monster from your deck to the graveyard with a different level from that monster, and the targeted monster's level becomes that of the sent monster. So if you have a specific vampire monster on the field that you want another one to match in level to then go into Xyz plays, Vampire's Desire definitely does help with that, but it can also help by being able to target a vampire monster in your graveyard, send 1 monster you control to the graveyard, and special summon that targeted monster. So if you have cards like your Yugioh Duel Links on the field, you can at least send this card to the graveyard and then have your vampire target thanks to Vampire Desire, since it just has to be a monster you control. It doesn't have to be a vampire monster for you to special summon back the vampire monster from the graveyard. And I also run 2 copies of Vampire's Domain. I run 2 of this card because it's a continuous spell, and it'll just remain on the field for the additional normal summon. Vampire Retainer can also search this card. Once per turn, you can pay 500 life points. During your main phase this turn, you can normal summon 1 vampire monster in addition to your normal summoner set, even if this card leaves the field. You can only gain this effect once per turn, and each time your vampire monster inflicts battle damage to your opponent, gain the same amount of life points. So being able to at least get back life points along with your opponent taking those life points damage, and having the additional normal summon can set up cards like your plays you would do with your Vampire Ghost on the field for the same play setup of just being able to pay life points instead to do so for that additional monster on the field. I also run 2 copies of Vampire Kingdom. Zombie monsters gain 500 attack during damage calc once per turn when a card is sent from your opponent's deck to the graveyard. Target 1 card on the field, send 1 vampire dark monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard, and destroy that card. So it makes it, if your opponent tries to do any Foolish Burial plays from sending cards from their deck to the graveyard, you'll destroy a card on their field and also give yourself more of a vampire setup in the graveyard for you to use. It's a 2 of just because there is a chance that it could be destroyed, or you use it as a send resource for some of your other cards like Vampire Ghost, but still you can utilize it and search it out with other cards we run in the deck, like our Vampire Takeover, while giving us more of a special summon on the field also. I also run 2 copies of Enemy Controller. Just a great card to be able to take your opponent's resource and once again still use it for some of our other plays that we may have in the deck, but also being able to set up other zombies in the graveyard for us just to special summon back. But the main play is it's also just a great disruption play for our opponent's cards, being able to take them for really no cost of our own, and also just having that quick play option. For the 1-ofs for these spells, I run 1 copy of Monster Reborn, 1 Mind Control for the same Enemy Controller play, 1 Call by the Grave, 1 Foolish Burial, and also 1 1-for-1 for the target to just have an easy summon of Vampire Familiar onto the field. For the trap cards, I run 3 copies of Vampire Domination. It's just a counter trap. When a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated while you control a vampire monster, negate the activation if you do destroy that card. Then if it was a monster card, gain life points equal to its original attack. You can activate 1 Vampire Domination per turn. So even if you just have to set up a vampire monster, if that's your only go-to play, as long as you have the counter trap, you have a negation of your opponent's card, and then also just being able to regain life if it was a monster that you destroyed with this card also. And lastly, for the traps and the main deck, 2 copies of Vampire Takeover if you have no cards in your field zone, and all face-up monsters you control are zombie monsters. Minimum 1, activate 1 Vampire Kingdom directly from your deck. Then you can special summon 1 Dark Vampire monster from your graveyard in defense position, giving you that target option for you to summon back cards like Familiar and Retainer, and then have the additional search with these cards, and also setting up your field spell. So with this, you have a addition of the field spell, a monster, and an additional search. You can go +2 thanks to this card when it's activated, and all your restriction is to not have a field spell in your field zone. That is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. I run 2 copies of Vampire Sucker, needing 2 zombie monsters. If you attribute a monster for the tribute summon, you can tribute summon a zombie monster your opponent controls, even though you do not control them. You can only use each of the following effects of Sucker once per turn. You can target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your opponent's field and defense, but it becomes a zombie monster. And if a zombie monster is special summoned from either graveyard, draw a card. So you have the play to set up the zombie monster on your opponent's field, then also being able to tribute it for some of your other zombie monsters as if it was your own monster, thanks to Vampire Sucker. Just needing 2 zombie monsters, and also being able to have that play to use each of the following just gives you that setup by taking an opponent's resource and then using it for your own. I also run 2 copies of Vampire Fascinator, with this card needing 2 or more monsters, including a zombie monster. So you can even use Vampire Sucker for that setup. And if this card is link summon, target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your field and defense position. Also, you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn except for zombie monsters. And you contribute 1 Vampire monster, target 1 monster your opponent controls, take control of it until the end phase. So another way to set up cards like the zombie vampire by taking your opponent's own resource to use with Vampire Fascinator, and also just being more of a play because it gives you that monster, while Vampire Sucker gives it to your opponent but lets you use it for yourself. For more of the generic Link monsters, 1 copy of Link Karibo, 1 copy of the Dark Charmer Gloomy, and 1 Barricade Board Blocker for the Vampire Kingdom plays. And then for the Xyz monsters, 1 copy of the Zombie Vampire, your go-to monster that also just helps for more graveyard setup by sending the top 4 cards of your deck to the graveyard. 1 Crimson Knight Vampire Braum, 1 number 24 Dragulus the Vampiric Dragon, 1 Damper Vampire Sheridan, and also 1 copy of Divine Arsenal Zeus for the Xyz lineup, giving you plenty of different level options for your Xyz, and also being able to utilize Zeus on top of those monsters after you've used their own monster effects. For the Synchro monsters, I run 1 copy of Red Eyes Zombie Necro Dragon, 1 Ancient Fairy Dragon for the field spell destruction of your opponent's own cards and being able to search out your Vampire Kingdom as well, and 1 Baron de Fleur with the Unizombie level adjustment and all of the level 6 monsters we run. It's another easy synchro to be able to summon out onto the field. And then as for some of the go-to plays in the deck, like I said, Vampire Ghosts can definitely help with just a 1 additional card setup if you have another Vampire card in your hand. So let's say you open up just the Vampire Ghost and a Vampire Domination. When it's normal summon, you can send another Vampire card from your hand or face on the field of the graveyard to add a level 4 or higher Vampire monster from your deck to your hand. So with that, you can get the additional search of your higher level Vampire monster of choice. You can go for the Vampire Scarlet Scourge and then send 1 level 2 or lower Vampire monster from your deck to your graveyard. So with that, you can go for the send of your Vampire Retainer to the graveyard. And then with this play, you have your setup being able to use Vampire Retainer, sending your Ghost to the graveyard to special summon Retainer. Then you'll pay 500 life points with Retainer to add your go-to additional card. You can add cards like Vampire's Domain or your Vampire Kingdom or your Vampire Desire, depending on what you want. We'll add Domain for this search, but then you can use your Ghost, banishing it, to give you the additional normal summon. So then you contribute your Retainer, which will also be banished, so remember that. So then you can summon out your Scarlet Scourge onto the field. When it's normal or special summon, paying 1,000 life points, target a vampire monster in your graveyard, except for Scarlet Scourge, and special summon it. So this helps with the additional resource. If you didn't want to go for that play, you would need the other monster that you sent to not be Vampire Domination, but to be 1 additional vampire monster. So if it was a card like Vampire Grace, you can get the special summon to summon out onto Scourge, and then you have the overlay play for your monsters being able to then go into your Damper Vampire Sheridan onto the field. Or, like I said, if you had the play already, you can go for the tribute if you had the discard for your Vampire Domination to go into more of a defensive play with cards like your Vampire Fraulein on the field and with that additional play setup. Or you can even have the play for your additional normal summon play to either add the Vampire's Domain or have additional search power or setup with cards like Vampire Kingdom, and also a level adjustment play with cards like Vampire Desire desire to have if you searched it off of the Vampire's Retainer while this card is on the field, being able to send the additional vampire monster to your graveyard while Retainer was on the field, to then be able to tribute out your Scourge and get that special summon of the vampire you sent to the graveyard with it. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, it's an awesome deck, and I always like going for more of the pure version of vampires that you can utilize. Maybe we'll see some new support for it in the future. Like I said, it's been over a year since we've had it, but there are other decks that definitely need some more support as well. But I always like seeing some new zombie support specifically designed for vampires. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.